Okay, I think I'm recording here, and this assignment or this activity involves looking at Prop 23 and drawing a causal diagram for those who support the proposition and another one for those who oppose the proposition. And I'm basing my arguments in terms of what I'm drawing in this causal diagram, on the statements made by supporters and opposers of this proposition. So before you listen to this video, I highly recommend reading the arguments in favor and against Prop 23 that you can find in the proposition booklet that I scanned and made available to you for both Prop 23 and I believe for the other prop that's actually your homework, which is Prop 22. So please read Prop 23 and then watch this. And what I'm going to show here is what I believe the arguments are of a supporter of this proposition. So a supporter of Prop 23 would argue that by implementing Proposition 23, you're going to have more doctors at dialysis clinics. And I think CDC is what stands for the dialysis clinics. That's the acronym that I'm using here. And they argue that it's specifically kidney doctors who are going to be at dialysis clinics. And there's a reason why they argue that, but you'll see that in the argument. And I use that here. I specifically write that it's kidney doctors there. Well, I don't think they disagree that if you have more doctors in the clinics, that it's going to cost you more to run the clinics. So there's a positive causality between the fact that we're staffing each clinic with a doctor and the fact that it's going to cost more to run the clinics. And these proponents of Prop 23 then argue that a greater cost to run the clinics is going to mean that there's less profits for those who are in the dialysis industry. They argue, well, they're rich anyway. Fine. So if they have less profit, no problem. That's what these supporters argue in the ballot measure. They also argue that if Prop 23 passes, that there are going to be stricter standards on the dialysis clinics and that they're going to have to report infections. So passage of Prop 23 means more infections are going to be reported. And what they state is that after a delay then, that's going to result in a lower number of infections. So there's a negative causality between infections being reported and the number of them, because if they're busy reporting infections, the clinics are going to be like, oh my gosh, that's not a good thing. We want to take care of that so we get fewer infections. Now, are infections an issue in clinics? I don't know. That would be something worth exploring. What's the infection rate? Is that a big issue? Perhaps it is. I'm not here to advocate for or against Prop 23. I want to make that clear. I'm here just to argue that there are ways you can think about whether you'd want to support Prop 23 or not, and ways that you can sketch it out and draw and figure out some of the areas based on your drawing where you maybe need to pursue more information. The supporters of Prop 23 would also, of course, argue that with more kidney doctors at the dialysis clinics, that there would also be fewer infections. So again, that's a negative causality. More doctors, fewer infections. More doctors, fewer infections. So that basically they're saying that the number of infections is going to go down as a result of this. And yes, it's going to cost the dialysis industry, but so what? We're taking care of people. Now let's look at what those who oppose the ballot measure would argue. Those who oppose the ballot measure would say that if Prop 23 passed, then, of course, there would be more doctors in clinics. That is part of what Prop 23 is about. But they argue that if there's more doctors in clinics, that there are going to be fewer doctors in emergency rooms. So they argue that there's a negative relationship between these two here. All right, so there's negative causality there. They also argue that if there's more doctors in clinics, that there are going to be more cost per patient. Now, the patient may not be the one paying for their service. It may be their insurance, but there's still going to be a greater cost per patient, however it's paid, whether it's paid by an insurance or whether it's paid by the person themselves. They would additionally argue that those who oppose Prop 23, that more doctors in the clinics will mean fewer or smaller profits for the dialysis company, and that is something I think the two sides would agree upon. The difference here, what I'm seeing, is that lower profits for the dialysis company, they would argue, mean that they're going to have to close some of the clinics. So clinics are going to be less available to the people who need them. And there's a lot of people who need them. I think both sides agree to that. But the opponents argue that it's going to result in more closures. Those who support it argue that there won't be more closures because there's a mandate in there saying that they can't close unless mandated by the state. So there's some question as to whether there would actually be clinic closures, but the opponents say that there would be. So this is something that, again, maybe would be worth looking into. Under what circumstances would a clinic close? Both under the proposition and not under the proposition, if you really want to dig into it. These folks here, though, are not arguing about some of the arguments made by the other side, which is they don't talk about the number of infections, notice, in this causal diagram. Number of infections doesn't come up. They argue, I believe, based upon what I saw, is that these clinics are already regulated. So they don't expect a significant change, I think, is implied in the number of infections. Again, looking at the number of infections might be a useful way to dig into that question. So I'm hopeful that these causal loop diagrams got you to think about how each side might interpret the implications of passage of Prop 23 based upon the arguments in the little booklet. And your homework is going to be to do something like this for Prop 22. And what I didn't draw was maybe something in the middle, which might be something maybe a little bit more realistic in terms of what you might expect to take place. But see if you can do this for Prop 22. That is going to be your assignment that is due this Saturday. You can draw it on a piece of paper, take a picture of it, upload that. There should be 2 causal loop diagrams, so it might be 2 pictures. If you can draw it on a computer, you can do it there. However you do it. I don't care how you draw it. I just want you to draw it in some way and make it so I can see it, so I can see your thinking and your process. There'll also be another projective geometry assignment. It's going to be a repeat of the one you did. So those of you who got 3 out of 3 on the one this week with the curve, that the first part of the ellipse that we drew, you don't have to do anything this week. If you got less than a 3 and you redo it and you get it right, you can get 3 out of 3. And I'll just give you the highest score of the 2 of them. And so a lot of folks didn't turn it in. This is your chance. You can turn it in and you can get 3 out of 3. And I'll talk a little bit more about that one because I want more of you to do it. Okay, I'll see you in class.